I found out my brother was using our dead father's email account on a Wednesday afternoon, while I was supposed to be grading ninth-grade essays about courage. Instead, I was reading an email from an 81-year-old woman begging my father, who'd been dead for 6 months, to please return her $45,000 because she couldn't afford her medication anymore. My father didn't steal that money, but his email address did. Or rather, the person who'd been impersonating him through it did. My brother Marcus. I thought the worst day of my life was the day we buried our father. I was wrong. The worst day was when I discovered that my brother had turned Dad's death into a business opportunity, and that the stress of discovering Marcus's crimes is probably what killed Dad in the first place. Let me be clear about something right from the start. This isn't a story about a misunderstanding or a mistake. This is about how my brother systematically used our dead father's reputation, his client relationships, and his good name to steal over $1 million from vulnerable elderly people. And it's about how I had to choose between protecting my family and protecting his victims. I chose the victims. And my mother has never forgiven me for it. But I'm getting ahead of myself. To understand how my brother became a monster, you need to understand what we were before. You need to see the family we used to be before grief and greed twisted us into something unrecognizable. Because the truth is, Marcus didn't start out evil. None of us saw this coming. Not me. Not Mom. Not even Dad, until it was too late. Until the night he stayed up past midnight, frantically emailing his clients to warn them about someone impersonating him, trying to protect the people who'd trusted him for decades. That was the night Dad had his heart attack. Alone at his desk, trying to save people from his own son. And Marcus didn't stop after Dad died. He got worse. He got bolder. He turned Dad's funeral into a networking opportunity, shaking hands with grieving clients and collecting their phone numbers for follow-up calls. Calls where he'd cry about honoring his father's legacy while draining their retirement accounts. What I'm about to tell you isn't just about financial fraud or family betrayal. It's about the moment I realized that exposing the truth would destroy what was left of my family, and I did it anyway. It's about living with the consequences of choosing justice over mercy. And it's about discovering that sometimes the people who hurt you the most aren't strangers. They're the ones who know exactly which wounds will never heal. My name is Elena Castellano. I'm a high school teacher. I'm someone's daughter, someone's sister, and someone's greatest disappointment. And this is the story of how I sent my own brother to prison, and how my family has never been the same since that my father, Richard Castellano, died suddenly of a heart attack on a Tuesday morning in March 2022. He was 63 years old, still working as an independent financial consultant, still helping people plan their retirements and manage their investments. He was the kind of man who returned every phone call, who remembered his clients' grandchildren's names, who built his entire reputation on trust. I was 31 when he died. My brother Marcus was 35. We'd grown up in a comfortable middle-class home in Portland. Both of us pushed toward success, but in different ways. I became a high school teacher, steady, reliable, comfortable. Marcus went into sales, always chasing the next big commission, the next flashy car, the next luxury apartment he could barely afford. Dad loved us both, but I always sensed his quiet disappointment in Marcus. Not because Marcus wasn't successful, he made decent money, but because of how he made it. There was always something slightly shady about Marcus's deals, something that made Dad's jaw tighten when Marcus bragged about his latest conquest at Sunday dinners. The funeral was enormous. Dad's clients came in droves, some of them elderly couples who wept openly, telling me how Dad had helped them retire with dignity, how he'd guided them through the 2008 crash without losing everything. I stood there in my black dress, shaking hands, and feeling proud of the legacy he'd left behind. Marcus stood beside me, playing the grieving son perfectly. He hugged the widows, accepted condolences with just the right amount of stoic emotion, and even gave a beautiful eulogy about how Dad had taught him the value of hard work and integrity. I believed every word of it. Mom was shattered. She and Dad had been married for 38 years, and watching her try to navigate a world without him was like watching someone learn to walk again after a devastating accident. She'd sit in Dad's home office for hours, just touching his things, his reading glasses, his coffee mug, the photo of all of us from our last Christmas together. Marcus and I took turns checking on her. We sorted through Dad's affairs together, or so I thought. We met with his lawyer, Mr. Chin, who walked us through the will. Everything split evenly between Mom, Marcus, and me, just as we expected. The house was paid off. There was a decent life insurance policy. Dad's business had some assets, but nothing extraordinary. What Dad did have was his reputation and his client list, 73 people who'd trusted him with their financial futures. Mr. Chin asked us what we wanted to do about Dad's business. Mom couldn't handle it. I had no training in finance. Marcus immediately volunteered to take it over, to honor Dad's legacy by continuing to serve his clients. I remember feeling relieved, grateful, even. Marcus would step up. Marcus would finally become the man Dad had always hoped he'd be. I should have known better. For the first few months after Dad's death, everything seemed fine. Marcus said he was transitioning Dad's clients, helping them find new advisors or offering to manage their accounts himself with a partner firm he'd joined. Mom seemed comforted knowing that Dad's work would continue. I threw myself into teaching, into grading papers and planning lessons, into anything that would distract me from the dad-shaped hole in my life. I called Mom every day. I visited every weekend. I helped her sort through decades of accumulated life. Dad's clothes, his books, his files. It was during one of those sorting sessions about 6 months after the funeral that I found the first thread that would unravel everything. Mom and I were cleaning out Dad's home office, boxing up old tax returns and client files to shred. She'd been having a hard day, crying every few minutes, so I told her to take a break while I finished up. That's when I found the notebook. It was leather-bound, expensive-looking, tucked in the back of Dad's desk drawer underneath a stack of old business cards. I almost didn't open it. It felt too personal, too much like reading his diary. But something made me flip through the pages. They were notes. Client notes. Dad's meticulous handwriting documenting conversations, concerns, portfolio adjustments. Normal stuff. But near the end, dated just 2 weeks before he died, there was an entry that made my blood run cold. Called Marcus today about the Sanders account. He says he's handling it, but something feels off. Need to check the transfers. Margaret Sanders sounded confused on the phone yesterday, said she never authorized the withdrawal Marcus mentioned. Follow up Monday. I stared at those words, reading them over and over. Dad died on a Tuesday. He never got his Monday follow-up. I told myself it was nothing. A misunderstanding. Marcus was probably just handling things differently than Dad would have, and Dad, being old school, was being overly cautious. But I couldn't stop thinking about it. I should have confronted Marcus right then. I should have asked him what Dad meant about the Sanders account. But I didn't. Instead, I made a choice that would lead me down a path I never imagined. I decided to look for myself. 2 days later, while Mom was at her book club, I went back to Dad's office. His computer was still there, an older desktop that Mom hadn't known what to do with. I turned it on, my hands shaking. I knew Dad's passwords. He'd told me years ago, just in case something happened, his birthday backwards, followed by Mom's initials. It worked. His email account opened, and I sat there staring at his inbox, feeling like a grave robber. But I typed Marcus into the search bar and started reading. What I found in those emails didn't just crack my world open, it detonated it. The first email was from Margaret Sanders, dated 3 weeks before Dad died. The subject line was urgent question about my account. Richard, I received a call from Marcus saying you were ill, and he was helping handle your accounts during your recovery. He said I needed to move $50,000 from my retirement fund into a high-yield opportunity before the market shifted. I'm confused because we just talked last week and you seemed fine. Can you please call me? Dad had responded immediately. Margaret, I am not ill, and I did not authorize Marcus to contact my clients or suggest any transfers. Please do not move any money. I will call you first thing Monday morning. I'm deeply sorry for this confusion. But Dad never made that Monday call. He died the Friday before. My stomach churned as I kept searching. There were more. So many more. Email after email from Dad's clients, confused about calls from Marcus, about investment opportunities, about urgent transfers that Dad had supposedly authorized. And email after email from Dad, increasingly frantic, trying to reassure his clients that he had not authorized any of these communications. The last email, sent at 11:47 p.m. on the Monday before Dad died, the night he had his heart attack, was to a client named Robertson, no relation to our lawyer. Robert, I have discovered that someone has been impersonating me and contacting my clients with fraudulent investment schemes. I am working with authorities to resolve this. Please, if anyone contacts you claiming to represent me or my business, do not engage with them and call me immediately. I am so sorry this has happened on my watch. I sat back in Dad's chair, my heart pounding so hard I thought I might throw up. Someone had been impersonating Dad, scamming his clients, using his reputation, his relationships, his trust. And Dad had known about it the night he died. The night he had a heart attack at his desk. I knew, in that moment, with absolute certainty, who that someone was. But I needed proof. I needed to see it with my own eyes before I could accept what my brother had become. What I found next didn't just prove Marcus was a thief. It proved he was a predator who'd been hunting the vulnerable from behind our dead father's name, and he'd been doing it for months after Dad was already in the ground. I spent the entire night digging through Dad's computer. I found files, spreadsheets, call logs. Dad had been investigating Marcus for weeks before he died. He documented everything, times, dates, amounts, client names. Marcus had been contacting Dad's clients, pretending that Dad had recommended him as a new advisor or partner. He'd pitched them on moving money into exclusive opportunities, high-yield investments, cryptocurrency ventures, real estate deals. But the money wasn't going into real investments. Marcus was funneling it into his own accounts, sometimes using shell companies, sometimes just outright stealing it. The amounts were staggering. $15,000 from one retired teacher. $30,000 from a widow. $75,000 from an elderly couple who'd trusted Dad for 20 years. By Dad's calculations, Marcus had stolen over $400,000 from at least 12 clients in the 2 months before Dad died. And then I found something that made everything so much worse. Dad had confronted Marcus. There was a printed email exchange, dated the week before Dad died. Dad had demanded Marcus return every penny, threatened to go to the police, threatened to cut him out of the will, out of the family, out of everything. Marcus's response was chilling. You don't have proof of anything, old man. Those clients came to me willingly. You're just bitter that I'm better at this than you ever were. And if you go to the police, I'll make sure everyone knows that you were the one who set up these deals before you got too senile to remember. Who do you think they'll believe? A dead man's emails or a living son who'll swear you authorized everything? Dad had responded one last time. I'm meeting with my attorney and the authorities Monday morning. Return the money, Marcus. Please. You're my son. Let me help you fix this before it's too late. That Monday morning, Dad had a massive heart attack and died at his desk, alone, before he could make that meeting. I sat in that office until sunrise, tears streaming down my face, rage and grief tangling inside me until I couldn't tell them apart. My brother hadn't just stolen from vulnerable people, he'd killed our father. Maybe not with his own hands, but the stress, the betrayal, the horror of discovering his own son was a monster? That's what stopped Dad's heart. And Marcus hadn't stopped. That was the worst part. I checked Dad's email account, the one Marcus didn't know I could access, and found messages that had come in after Dad died. Automated notifications, password reset requests, login attempts. Marcus had been trying to access Dad's email account for months, probably looking to delete evidence or continue his schemes. He'd failed because he didn't know Dad's passwords. But that didn't stop him. I created a new email account and started reaching out to Dad's clients, carefully, introducing myself as his daughter. I said I was reviewing his accounts after his death and wanted to ensure everything was in order. The responses I got back broke my heart all over again. 7 people, 7 elderly, trusting people, had transferred money to Marcus after Dad died. Marcus had called them, crying, saying he was trying to honor his father's memory by continuing his work. He'd used Dad's death as a sympathy play, as a manipulation tactic, as a way to steal from people who were already grieving the loss of their trusted advisor. Mrs. Henderson, 81 years old, had given Marcus $45,000 from her late husband's pension, money she'd been saving to move into assisted living. Marcus had promised her a 20% return in 6 months. That was 8 months ago. She'd been calling the number Marcus gave her for weeks, but it went to voicemail. I sat with my laptop open, reading her desperate email, and I made a decision. I was going to expose Marcus. I was going to make sure he paid for what he'd done. But first, I needed to understand the full scope of his crimes, and that meant doing something I never thought I'd be capable of. I hacked my own brother's life. I knew Marcus's patterns, his passwords, his security questions. We'd grown up together, shared accounts as kids, knew each other's pet names and favorite teachers. It took me 3 days, but I broke into his email account. What I found was so much worse than I'd imagined. Marcus had created an entire fake identity online. He'd built a website using variations of Dad's business name. Our Castellano Financial Services became R&M Castellano Consulting, just different enough to seem legitimate. He'd photoshopped certificates, copied Dad's testimonials, even used old photos of Dad at his desk to make it look like they'd worked together. He'd been targeting Dad's clients specifically, but he'd also been reaching out to new victims through social media, through investment forums, through anywhere he could find retirees with savings and not enough tech literacy to spot a scam. The numbers were staggering. In the 18 months since Dad died, Marcus had stolen over $1.2 million from at least 40 people. Some had given him $5,000. Some had given him their entire retirement savings. And Marcus was living large. His email was full of receipts, a new BMW, a luxury apartment downtown, trips to Vegas and Miami, designer clothes, expensive dinners. He'd even bought a Rolex and posted it on Instagram with the caption, "Hard work pays off." But the worst discovery was in a folder labeled insurance. Marcus had been researching Dad's life insurance policy. There were emails to different attorneys, questions about contesting wills, calculations about how much money Mom would get versus how much Marcus could claim. He'd been trying to figure out how to get a bigger share of Dad's estate. And there were messages to someone named Vanessa, messages that revealed Marcus had a gambling problem. A serious one. He owed money to people, dangerous people, and he was using the scammed funds to pay them off while supporting his lifestyle. The money from those elderly victims wasn't going into investments or savings, it was going to casinos, poker games, bookies. My brother wasn't just a con artist. He was a desperate, addicted liar who turned our father's death into a business opportunity. I had all the evidence I needed to destroy him. Every email, every transfer, every victim. But revenge isn't as simple as handing someone over to the police. Sometimes, the real punishment requires something more personal. I spent 2 weeks planning. I documented everything, making copies of emails, bank statements, client testimonials, message exchanges. I built a timeline, a paper trail that connected Marcus to every stolen dollar. Then I made a choice that still keeps me up at night. I didn't go to the police. Not yet. Instead, I created a fake email account and sent a message to Marcus, claiming to be a potential investor who'd heard about his services from a friend. I said I had $500,000 in a retirement fund and was looking for someone to help me invest it aggressively. I laid the bait, and Marcus, predictable as ever, bit hard. We arranged a meeting at a coffee shop downtown. I told him my name was Jennifer Foster, that I'd be wearing a blue scarf. What I didn't tell him was that I'd also invited 12 of Dad's former clients to the same coffee shop, at the same time, without explaining why. And I'd invited Mom. That Thursday afternoon, I watched Marcus walk into that coffee shop in his expensive suit, his fake smile, his predatory confidence. He scanned the room looking for his mark, for Jennifer Foster. Instead, he found me. I stood up from a corner table, pulled off my sunglasses, and watched the color drain from his face as he recognized me. Then I watched it drain even further as he realized who else was there. Mrs. Henderson, the Robertsons, Margaret Sanders, Mr. Chun, our family lawyer who I'd finally contacted 2 days before, and Mom, sitting at a table by the window, staring at her firstborn son with an expression I'd never seen on her face before, pure, devastated betrayal. My brother opened his mouth to speak, to explain, to charm his way out of this like he always did. But I didn't give him the chance. Instead, I did something that would change all of our lives forever, that I had prepared a speech. Something eloquent about justice and betrayal, about Dad's legacy and Marcus's crimes. But when the moment came, standing there in that coffee shop with everyone's eyes on me, all I could manage was the truth. I told them everything. I explained how I'd found Dad's notebook, how I discovered the emails, how I traced Marcus's scam through months of careful investigation. I presented printed copies of bank transfers, emails from victims, screenshots of Marcus's fake website, and fabricated credentials. But the worst part, the part that made Mom start crying quietly into her hands, was what I told them about Dad's last night. I explained that Dad had known, that he'd been planning to turn Marcus in, that the stress of discovering his own son was a criminal, of having to choose between protecting his clients and protecting his child, had likely contributed to the heart attack that killed him. Marcus tried to leave. He actually turned toward the door, but Mr. Chun, who'd brought a colleague, blocked his path. The colleague was a police detective. I'd finally called them that morning. Marcus did what Marcus always did, he lied. He claimed I was mentally unstable, that I was grieving and confused, that he'd been trying to help Dad's clients, that any money transferred was for legitimate investments that just hadn't paid out yet. He swore he had documentation, proof, that this was all a misunderstanding. The detective asked him to provide that documentation. Marcus said it was at his office. The detective offered to accompany him there immediately. That's when Marcus finally broke. He didn't confess exactly. Marcus was too smart for that, but he stopped lying. He just stood there, his expensive suit suddenly looking like a costume, his face crumbling, and said the only honest thing I'd heard from him in years. "I'm sorry, Mom." Not sorry to the victims. Not sorry for what he'd done. Sorry he'd been caught. Mom looked at him for a long moment, and I saw something die in her eyes. Then she turned to me and asked a question that still haunts me. "Did you know before today? Have you been watching him do this without stopping him?" I had to tell her the truth. I'd known for 2 weeks. I'd let Marcus continue his scam for 14 days while I built my case, while I planned this confrontation, while he potentially stole from even more people. I tried to explain that I needed proof, that I needed to make sure everything was documented, that I wanted to give her closure and justice, not just accusations. But the look on her face told me she didn't see it that way. She saw 2 sons who'd betrayed her. One who'd become a monster, and one who'd let him keep being a monster just a little bit longer. The police arrested Marcus that afternoon. The investigation that followed revealed even more victims, even more money, even more lies. But the real devastation wasn't in the courtroom. It was in my mother's living room, where she sat alone in the house my father had died in, grieving the loss of both her husband and her son. Marcus was eventually sentenced to 8 years in federal prison for wire fraud, identity theft, and a dozen other charges. The DA called it one of the most egregious cases of financial elder abuse they'd seen. Some of the victims got their money back through asset seizures and restitution orders. Some didn't. Mrs. Henderson never recovered her $45,000. Marcus had gambled most of it away, and what was left went to legal fees and paying back other victims who had lawyers. She had to give up her assisted living plans and move in with her daughter in another state. The Robertsons got back about 60% of what they'd lost. They told me it was enough, that they were grateful for what I'd done. But I could see the anxiety in their eyes, the knowledge that their retirement wouldn't be what they'd planned. Marcus's conviction didn't bring back the money or the trust or the peace of mind. It just confirmed what everyone already knew, that my brother had chosen greed over his own father's legacy, over vulnerable people's security, over everything decent. But the worst consequence wasn't Marcus's prison sentence. It was what happened to my family. Mom never fully forgave me. She understood logically why I'd waited, why I'd built the case, why I'd orchestrated that confrontation. But emotionally, she couldn't separate my actions from Marcus's. In her mind, I'd had the power to stop him immediately and hadn't. I'd let him hurt more people while I played detective. She visits Marcus in prison. She still puts money in his commissary account. She writes him letters. When I asked her why, she said something that broke my heart. He's still my son. He's sick and he needs help. You, on the other hand, chose to hurt him. That was deliberate. We're not estranged exactly. We still talk, still have awkward holiday dinners when Marcus is behind bars and can't attend. But there's a distance between us that never fully closes, a reminder that I chose justice over family, and she can't quite forgive me for it. As for Marcus, he writes me letters sometimes. Long, rambling things about how prison has changed him, how he understands now what Dad was trying to teach him, how he plans to make amends when he gets out. I never write back, because I know my brother. I know that he's learned from his mistakes, but not the lesson everyone hopes he learned. Marcus learned that he got caught because he was too greedy, too visible, too careless with evidence. He learned that family will turn on you if you give them enough reason. He didn't learn empathy. He didn't learn remorse. He didn't learn that the people he hurt were real human beings with real lives he destroyed. He just learned to be a better criminal next time. I exposed my brother's crimes and watched him go to prison. I thought that would bring me peace, that justice would heal the wound left by my father's death. Instead, I learned that some betrayals leave scars too deep for any verdict to heal. 3 years later, I still teach high school. I still visit Mom on weekends, though our conversations are more careful now, more surface level. I helped establish a victim support fund in Dad's name, trying to channel his legacy towards something positive. But late at night, when I can't sleep, I think about that 2-week gap. Those 14 days when I knew what Marcus was doing and didn't stop him immediately. I tell myself I made the right choice, that without solid evidence, Marcus would have weaseled out of consequences. I tell myself that the theatrical confrontation, the presence of victims, the overwhelming proof, that was necessary. But I also know that during those 2 weeks, Marcus met with at least 3 new potential victims. I tracked them in his emails. 2 of them backed out before transferring money. 1 didn't. An 86-year-old man named Paul Hendricks gave Marcus $12,000 4 days before I orchestrated that coffee shop confrontation. Mr. Hendricks got his money back eventually, but I'll never forget the guilt of knowing I could have prevented that. That in my quest for perfect justice, for the satisfying confrontation, for the moment where I could be the hero who exposed the villain, I'd allowed 1 more person to be hurt. That's the truth I live with now. That's the scar I carry. I saved Dad's legacy. I exposed Marcus's crimes. I helped victims get justice. But I also learned that sometimes doing the right thing means accepting that you've also done something wrong. That justice and vengeance aren't as far apart as we'd like to believe. That protecting people can look a lot like punishing them. My brother used our dead father's account to scam vulnerable people, and I used my brother's crimes to reclaim our father's honor. We both manipulated the dead for our own purposes. His were evil. Mine were righteous. But we both learned our tactics from the same place, from a family where secrets festered, where problems were hidden until they exploded, where love was conditional on success, and appearances mattered more than truth. Dad died trying to protect his clients from his own son. Mom chose to forgive the son who destroyed people's lives over the daughter who exposed him. Marcus became a monster who wore our father's face to hunt victims. And me? I became the person who chose perfect justice over immediate mercy, who calculated consequences instead of just calling the police the moment I knew, who needed the satisfaction of a confrontation more than I needed to protect every possible victim. We're all, in our own ways, still living in Dad's shadow, still fighting over his legacy, his memory, his ghost in the digital world. The difference is, I'm the only one who admits it. Marcus will be released in 5 years. I know he'll come looking for me, looking for Mom, looking for some form of reconciliation or revenge. I'm not sure which. I know he'll have learned new tricks in prison, new ways to manipulate, new scams to run. And I know that when that day comes, I'll have to choose again between family and justice, between mercy and consequence, between the daughter my father raised and the vigilante his death created. I just hope that next time I make the choice Dad would have wanted. Not the one that feels satisfying. Not the one that makes a good story. The one that protects people immediately, no matter the cost to my own need for perfect justice. Because in the end, that's what Dad spent his whole life doing, protecting people, even from his own family. Even when it cost him everything. Even when it stopped his heart. That's the lesson I learned too late, bought with other people's suffering and my father's ghost. That's the price of using the dead to fight the living. And it's a price I'll be paying for the rest of my life. Every story leaves a mark. If this one touched you, let the telling tree grow by your like and subscribe.